The Royal Lodge, the 30-room residence of Prince Andrew and his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, has sparked public outrage over its lavish grandeur and the prince's right to live in such splendor on a Crown estate property.
The gates of Royal Lodge closed quietly that night. No announcement. No farewell. No royal car waiting at the front entrance. Instead, sources say Sarah Ferguson, once one of the most recognizable women in the royal orbit, was quietly moved out under cover of darkness. And what happened inside those final hours may explain why the palace has remained completely silent ever since. The mansion that became a royal trap. For more than 2 decades, Royal Lodge represented something extraordinary in the strange ecosystem of royal privilege. It wasn't just another residence tucked somewhere inside the vast grounds of Windsor. Royal Lodge was a 30-room mansion set deep within Windsor Great Park, one of the most protected and prestigious royal estates in Britain. The estate carried enormous historical weight. The Queen Mother herself had lived there for years, and its sweeping gardens, private driveways, and heavily guarded gates made it one of the most secluded addresses in the United Kingdom. For Prince Andrew, it was more than a residence. It was a symbol of status. And for Sarah Ferguson, it became something even more complicated. Because long after her divorce from Andrew in 1996, the former Duchess of York continued living at Royal Lodge as if nothing had changed. The arrangement baffled many royal watchers. Most divorced couples go their separate ways. Yet Andrew and Ferguson continued sharing the same royal estate for years, insisting that their unusual living situation was about family. Ferguson herself famously called the arrangement the royal tripod. Andrew, Fergie, and their daughters. 3 pillars holding everything together. On paper, the explanation sounded touching. 2 parents determined to remain close for the sake of Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. A modern royal family redefining tradition. But behind palace walls, some insiders believed the explanation was far less romantic. Because maintaining that lifestyle required something extremely valuable. Royal protection. The property itself came with a 75-year lease granted to Prince Andrew, a deal critics often described as astonishingly generous given the property's value. And for years, the arrangement worked. Ferguson woke each morning inside a mansion many billionaires would envy. She walked through gardens once maintained for royal matriarchs. She attended public events as the charismatic, unconventional ex-royal who had somehow managed to stay inside the royal orbit. She wrote books. She appeared on television. She rebuilt a public image that had once been shattered by scandal. To many observers, it looked like one of the greatest royal comebacks ever attempted. But what the public didn't see, what very few people outside palace circles understood, was how fragile that entire structure really was. Because Royal Lodge wasn't simply a home. It was a privilege tied entirely to Prince Andrew's position within the royal family. And as long as Andrew remained protected by royal status, the arrangement could continue. But by the late 2010s, that protection was beginning to crumble. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. The first serious cracks appeared when Andrew's relationship with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein began dominating headlines. The association had been whispered about for years, but it exploded into global controversy once Epstein's criminal history and connections to powerful figures were exposed. Suddenly, Andrew's social circle was no longer just an embarrassment. It was becoming a liability for the monarchy itself. Royal advisors reportedly warned that the scandal could damage the credibility of the crown. Public anger was growing. Media investigations intensified. And the palace, which had quietly managed controversies for decades, was now facing a crisis that could not easily be contained. The turning point came in 2019. Prince Andrew agreed to a televised interview meant to clear his name. Instead, the broadcast became one of the most disastrous media appearances in royal history. Viewers watched as Andrew struggled to explain his friendship with Epstein, offered bizarre explanations for his whereabouts during key accusations, and failed to show empathy toward Epstein's victims. Within hours of the interview airing, public reaction was explosive. Royal commentators called it catastrophic. Sponsors and charities began distancing themselves. And inside palace walls, patience was reportedly running out. Andrew stepped back from public duties soon afterward, effectively ending his role as a working royal. But the consequences did not stop there. Because once Andrew's royal position collapsed, everything connected to it suddenly became uncertain. including Royal Lodge. 4 years, the mansion had functioned as a private world where Andrew and Ferguson could continue their unusual arrangement away from scrutiny. Now it was becoming something else entirely. A symbol of royal excess. Critics began asking uncomfortable questions. Why was a disgraced prince still occupying one of the Crown Estate's most valuable properties? Why was a divorced former duchess still living there rent-free? And perhaps most damaging of all, why had the palace allowed this arrangement to continue for so long? Inside Buckingham Palace, those questions were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. But what the public didn't realize at the time was that discussions about Royal Lodge had already begun behind closed doors. Serious discussions. Discussions that involved not just King Charles, but also Prince William. And according to several royal insiders, the future of Royal Lodge, and the fate of the woman who had lived there for nearly 20 years, was already being quietly decided. The countdown had begun, and Sarah Ferguson may have been the last person to realize just how quickly her royal sanctuary was about to disappear. The palace meeting that changed everything. 4 years, the situation at Royal Lodge had been tolerated rather than accepted. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors had grown increasingly uneasy about the optics of it all. A disgraced prince still occupying one of the Crown Estate's most valuable residences. His ex-wife, no longer a working royal, continuing to live there as though the divorce had never happened. Public frustration was building. But what most people didn't realize was that the real pressure was no longer coming from the media or the public. It was coming from inside the royal family itself. By 2025, King Charles had been on the throne long enough to begin reshaping the monarchy according to his own vision, one that insiders repeatedly described as a slimmed-down monarchy. Fewer working royals, fewer publicly funded privileges, and far less tolerance for scandal. For Charles, the issue of Prince Andrew had already become deeply uncomfortable. The Epstein controversy had damaged the reputation of the monarchy globally, and every time Andrew's name appeared in headlines, the Crown's credibility took another hit. But Royal Lodge presented a problem that was not just symbolic, it was logistical. Because the mansion wasn't simply a private property. It was part of the Crown Estate. And every day Andrew remained there, critics argued that the monarchy was still protecting him. That perception was becoming politically dangerous. Behind closed doors, palace advisors began discussing what insiders would later describe as the Royal Lodge problem. At first, the conversations were cautious. Could Andrew quietly relocate? Could the lease be renegotiated? Could a compromise be reached that would avoid a public confrontation? But Andrew reportedly refused every suggestion. For him, Royal Lodge was more than a home. It was the last visible symbol of his former royal status. Losing it would mean something far more humiliating than leaving a house. It would mean accepting that his life inside the monarchy was truly over. So he stayed. And as months passed, frustration inside the palace grew. Then came the moment that reportedly changed everything. According to several royal commentators and insiders, a private family discussion took place involving King Charles, Prince William, and Andrew's daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. The details of that conversation have never been officially confirmed, but multiple sources have described its message as unmistakably clear. The status quo could not continue. The monarchy was entering a new era, one that demanded credibility, discipline, and public trust. And as long as Andrew remained at Royal Lodge, the shadow of scandal would continue hanging over the entire institution. For William in particular, the issue was deeply personal. As the future king, he understood better than anyone that the survival of the monarchy depended on public confidence. And the Andrew scandal had already tested that confidence to its limit. Royal insiders say William believed the family had waited too long to act. The damage had already been done. Now the only option left was to draw a line. And that line ran directly through Royal Lodge. By the autumn of 2025, preparations for a major royal announcement were quietly underway. Palace communications teams drafted statements. Legal advisors reviewed property agreements. Senior courtiers debated how the decision would be framed publicly. Then, on October 30th, the announcement finally came. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement that sent shockwaves through royal watchers. Prince Andrew would lose his remaining royal titles and honors. His formal role within the monarchy was over. But buried within the announcement was a detail that stunned observers even more. The lease agreement for Royal Lodge had been terminated. Not revised. Not renegotiated. Terminated. The message was unmistakable. Andrew had to leave. For the first time since the Epstein scandal erupted, the monarchy had taken decisive action that directly affected Andrew's personal life. And the impact went far beyond him. Because there was one person the palace statement did not mention even once. Sarah Ferguson. No acknowledgement. No explanation. No comment on her living situation. Nothing. After 15 years of living inside Royal Lodge, the former Duchess of York had effectively vanished from the palace's official narrative. To royal historians, that silence spoke volumes. The monarchy was not just removing Andrew from a property. It was erasing an entire chapter of royal history. And suddenly, the reality facing Sarah Ferguson became brutally clear. Royal Lodge was closing. Andrew would eventually relocate to a smaller residence on the Sandringham estate. But Ferguson had no such safety net. She had sold her London townhouse months earlier. Her businesses were struggling. Several charities had quietly distanced themselves from her name. And now the one place she had called home for nearly 2 decades was about to disappear. The countdown had officially begun. At first, palace insiders suggested the pair would have until January 2026 to vacate the mansion. But even as that deadline approached, something strange began happening. Andrew was still being seen around the estate. Staff continued entering the property. Lights remained on in the mansion at night. Yet one figure was suddenly missing. Sarah Ferguson. Friends began noticing something unusual. She had stopped appearing at public engagements. Her social media accounts went quiet. Journalists attempting to confirm her whereabouts received no clear answers. Then came the rumor that would eventually send royal watchers into a frenzy. Several witnesses claimed Ferguson had been seen leaving Royal Lodge months before the official deadline. Late one evening. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without luggage. And without telling anyone where she was going. At the time, the sighting attracted little attention. But in hindsight, it raised a chilling possibility. Because if the timeline was correct, Sarah Ferguson may have left Royal Lodge before the palace announcement was even made. Which leads to the question that still haunts royal observers today. Did she know what was coming? Had someone inside the palace warned her? Or had she simply realized that the royal world she had depended on for decades was finally closing its doors? What happened next would make those final days at Royal Lodge even more mysterious. Because when Prince Andrew eventually left the mansion months later, Sarah Ferguson was already gone. Vanished from the estate. Vanished from public view. And the circumstances of her departure would soon become one of the most unsettling royal stories in years. The documents that changed everything. By the time Sarah Ferguson disappeared from Royal Lodge, the royal scandal surrounding Prince Andrew had already shaken the monarchy to its core. But what few people realized was that an even larger storm was about to arrive. And when it did, it wouldn't just threaten Andrew. It would place Sarah Ferguson herself directly under an unforgiving spotlight. For years, Ferguson had publicly described her connection to the late financier Jeffrey Epstein as nothing more than a mistake. In interviews, she repeatedly insisted that meeting him had been a brief lapse in judgment, an unfortunate moment she deeply regretted. It was a narrative that many people reluctantly accepted. After all, Epstein had moved in elite social circles for decades. Politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and royalty had crossed paths with him at one time or another. But everything changed when new investigative documents related to the Epstein network began surfacing. Suddenly, the story that Ferguson had told for years no longer appeared quite so simple. Inside those documents were references that suggested her connection to Epstein may have been far more complicated than previously believed. Emails, financial links, and private communications that raised deeply uncomfortable questions about how close the relationship really was. One particular set of messages drew intense attention. According to investigators examining Epstein's communications network, Ferguson had written emails that described the financier in surprisingly personal terms. In one message, she reportedly referred to him as someone she trusted deeply, language that stunned many observers given Epstein's already controversial reputation. The tone of the messages suggested something more than a casual acquaintance. Something closer. Something personal. For critics of the monarchy, the revelation was explosive. Because by the time those communications resurfaced, Epstein's crimes were already widely known. His conviction years earlier had left a permanent stain on anyone associated with him, which meant every newly uncovered document raised a devastating question. How much did the people around him truly know? For Prince Andrew, the damage had already been catastrophic. His disastrous television interview had permanently destroyed his credibility in the eyes of many viewers. But Ferguson had largely avoided the same level of scrutiny. Until now. Suddenly journalists were revisiting old financial records. Years earlier, Ferguson had publicly acknowledged that Epstein had once helped resolve a significant personal debt she owed. At the time, she had described the payment as an embarrassing mistake, something she deeply regretted accepting. But in the context of the newly examined communications, that explanation began to look increasingly uncomfortable. Because it suggested that Epstein's involvement in her life had not been brief or accidental. Instead, it appeared to reveal a relationship that extended into financial territory, something that immediately raised further questions about influence, dependence, and loyalty. The public reaction was swift. Royal commentators who had once defended Ferguson now found themselves struggling to explain the situation. Critics argued that the monarchy had tolerated questionable relationships for far too long, and the timing could not have been worse. Because these revelations were emerging precisely at the moment when King Charles was attempting to modernize the royal institution. The monarchy was trying to rebuild trust. And yet once again, the Epstein scandal was dragging the royal family back into global headlines. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors reportedly realized something troubling. The situation was no longer limited to Prince Andrew. The entire environment surrounding Royal Lodge was becoming politically toxic. And the presence of Sarah Ferguson, someone whose name was now appearing in connection with Epstein's network, was making the problem even more dangerous. Which may explain something that had puzzled royal observers for months. Why Ferguson had suddenly vanished. Because when reporters attempted to track her whereabouts after she left Royal Lodge, the answers were surprisingly vague. Some sources claimed she had traveled to the French Alps to stay with friends. Others reported sightings in the Middle East. There were rumors of private gatherings in the Gulf, art events attended alongside Princess Eugenie, and quiet meetings far from the cameras of British media. None of it was officially confirmed. But the pattern was unmistakable. Sarah Ferguson was no longer visible inside the United Kingdom's royal orbit. For someone who had spent decades navigating publicity, interviews, and public appearances, the sudden silence was extraordinary. No television interviews. No charity events. No public defense. Just absence. And for many observers, that absence raised a disturbing possibility. What if Ferguson hadn't simply left Royal Lodge because the palace asked her to? What if she had left because she knew something worse was coming? Because as investigators and journalists continued examining Epstein-related records, the list of names connected to the scandal continued expanding. And with each new revelation, the pressure on anyone connected to that world intensified. For Sarah Ferguson, the stakes were enormous. Her businesses were already collapsing. Several charitable organizations had quietly removed her as patron. Companies linked to her name were dissolving. And now the Epstein revelations threatened to destroy what little public credibility she still possessed. Friends reportedly advised her to stay completely out of the spotlight, to avoid interviews, to avoid statements, to wait until the media storm passed. But storms like this rarely pass quickly, especially when they involve the British royal family, and especially when the story contains elements that journalists find irresistible. Money, power, secrecy, and the hidden lives of people who once stood near the throne. Which brings us to the moment that made the entire situation even stranger. Because while Ferguson remained invisible, Prince Andrew was still inside Royal Lodge. The mansion lights continued to appear in photographs taken from distant roads. Staff vehicles were occasionally seen entering the gates. But the woman who had shared that house for nearly 20 years was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had already left the story behind. And when Andrew finally departed the estate months later, something extraordinary happened. He didn't leave during the day. He didn't leave with photographers documenting the moment. Instead, the move took place quietly, at night, with vehicles entering the property long after sunset. And by the time the gates of Royal Lodge closed again, one of the most controversial royal residences in modern history stood completely empty. But the real drama of this story was only beginning. Because within weeks, an event would occur that shocked even the most experienced royal observers. An event that transformed the Royal Lodge scandal into something far more serious. And once again, Sarah Ferguson's name would resurface in ways nobody expected. The night everything collapsed. For months, Royal Lodge had stood as a silent symbol of a royal scandal that refused to disappear. The lights inside the mansion still flickered on some evenings. Staff vehicles occasionally passed through the gates. But the woman who had once filled the residence with interviews, charity work, and public appearances was nowhere to be seen. Sarah Ferguson had vanished from the estate long before the final chapter unfolded. And then, in February 2026, something happened that no royal observer expected. It was the kind of event that instantly transforms a scandal into a historic moment. Because for the first time in modern British royal history, a senior royal figure found himself standing at the center of a police investigation that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. The moment came quietly. No press conference. No palace warning. Just police vehicles arriving at a quiet residence on the Sandringham estate. By that point, Prince Andrew had already relocated from Royal Lodge. The once powerful royal had moved to Wood Farm, a far smaller house tucked away within the Sandringham grounds. Compared to the sprawling mansion he had occupied for decades, the new residence felt almost modest. 2 reception rooms. A kitchen. A quiet corner of the estate where life was supposed to continue quietly, far from the cameras that had once followed him everywhere. But that morning, silence shattered. Police officers arrived at the property and took Andrew into custody on suspicion of misconduct connected to his past role as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade. The allegation was extraordinary. Investigators believed Andrew may have shared sensitive trade information with Jeffrey Epstein during the years when the two men maintained contact. For a royal family that had spent centuries carefully managing its image, the implications were staggering. A member of the monarchy being questioned over potential misconduct involving classified government information was not merely embarrassing. It was historic. Andrew was taken to a police station and held for questioning for several hours. News of the arrest spread across the world within minutes. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Social media erupted with speculation. Commentators immediately pointed out the symbolic timing. The arrest reportedly occurred on Andrew's birthday. A moment that should have been quiet had suddenly become one of the most humiliating days of his life. Royal historians struggled to find comparable moments in modern history. Some reached back centuries, comparing the shock of the moment to scandals that had once shaken European monarchies in the past. For King Charles, the situation was deeply uncomfortable. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement expressing concern over the development, but offered no further comment. The wording was carefully chosen, deliberately restrained. The monarchy had learned from previous controversies that the safest strategy during a legal investigation was silence. But outside the palace gates, the story was exploding. News organizations began revisiting every detail of Andrew's past relationship with Epstein. Journalists examined old photographs, travel records, and testimonies that had circulated for years. And inevitably, another name resurfaced once again. Sarah Ferguson. Because while Andrew was facing the most serious legal scrutiny of his life, Ferguson was nowhere near the United Kingdom. Reports began placing her thousands of miles away. Some sources claimed she had been seen in the French Alps, staying with acquaintances in a private resort. Others reported sightings in the Middle East, where she was rumored to have attended art events connected to Princess Eugenie's professional work. One report suggested she had appeared briefly at an international art fair in Qatar, moving through the event quietly and avoiding media attention. None of these appearances were officially confirmed. But the pattern was striking. At the very moment the scandal surrounding Andrew was escalating to its most dangerous point, Sarah Ferguson was no longer anywhere near the center of the storm. To some observers, that timing looked less like coincidence and more like careful distance. Legal analysts began raising an uncomfortable question. If investigators were examining Andrew's connections to Epstein, would they also want to speak with individuals who had been part of that same social circle? Ferguson's past financial links to Epstein had already been publicly acknowledged years earlier. The resurfacing of emails and financial connections had already placed her under renewed scrutiny. Now, with Andrew facing formal investigation, speculation intensified about whether her name might reappear in legal inquiries. Royal commentators began debating what this meant for her future. Some argued that Ferguson had been unfairly dragged into Andrew's problems for years. They pointed out that she had built a separate career through writing, philanthropy, and media appearances. Others were far less sympathetic. They argued that remaining inside Andrew's orbit for so long had inevitably tied her reputation to his. And as Andrew's situation grew more serious, Ferguson's own public image was collapsing alongside it. By early spring of 2026, the consequences were impossible to ignore. The mansion at Royal Lodge was empty. Andrew had been forced into a far smaller life on the Sandringham estate. Businesses connected to Ferguson were dissolving. Charities had quietly removed her name from their websites. The woman who had once appeared on talk shows, written best-selling books, and built a reputation as one of the most recognizable figures connected to the royal family had effectively disappeared from public life. And yet one question still lingered over everything. Where exactly was Sarah Ferguson now? Because for someone who had spent decades navigating publicity and media attention, her silence had become almost eerie. No interviews. No statements. No attempts to defend herself. Just distance. And for many royal watchers, that silence suggested something deeper than embarrassment. It suggested strategy. Because when scandals reach their most dangerous stage, the people involved often follow one simple rule. Stay out of sight. Stay out of reach. And wait for the storm to pass. But storms involving the British royal family rarely pass quickly. Especially when the story includes power, scandal, and secrets buried inside one of the most famous royal residences in Britain. And as the gates of Royal Lodge remained closed, the final chapter of Sarah Ferguson's story was still waiting to unfold. What the return of the 1917 mandate could mean for the future. When palace officials confirmed that the 1917 mandate still stands at the heart of the monarchy's legal structure, the announcement itself seemed simple. Just a quiet reminder of an old constitutional rule. But royal history shows that when the palace brings attention to foundational decrees, it is rarely accidental. Because those documents exist for one reason above all others: to protect the continuity of the crown. For more than 1,000 years, the British monarchy has survived wars, revolutions, scandals, and generational change. And every time the institution faced uncertainty, it relied on one powerful principle: clear rules that define who represents the monarchy and how royal authority operates. The 1917 letters patent were created during exactly such a moment. When King George V introduced the rule during World War I, Britain was facing growing suspicion toward European royal families. Public trust in monarchies across Europe was collapsing. Several royal houses had already fallen. George V understood that survival required something dramatic. The monarchy had to modernize and tighten its structure. So he limited the number of people entitled to royal titles and clarified who officially represented the crown. At the time, the decision helped stabilize the monarchy during a turbulent period. But more than a century later, the same rule may be serving a very different purpose. Today, the monarchy faces a different kind of challenge. Not political revolution, but global visibility. Every action taken by members of the royal family is instantly analyzed by millions of people around the world. Social media amplifies every disagreement. Documentaries and interviews spread royal stories across continents. And for the first time in history, members of the royal family can operate as independent public figures outside the palace structure. That reality changed dramatically when Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, chose to step away from royal duties. Their departure did not remove them from the royal family. But it did create something the monarchy had never previously needed to define. A prince who lives abroad. A royal identity that operates outside the institution. And a global media presence that speaks independently from palace messaging. For the monarchy, that situation is not simply a personal matter. It raises structural questions about how royal authority works in a modern media landscape. Which is why constitutional experts believe the palace may now be reinforcing older rules like the 1917 mandate. Not necessarily to punish anyone, but to clarify the boundaries of the institution. Because the crown must always protect the line between royal family membership and royal representation. Those two ideas may sound similar, but historically they are very different. Someone can belong to the royal family by birth, but representing the crown requires a specific role within the institution. That distinction may become increasingly important as the monarchy moves into the next generation. Under King Charles III, the royal household is widely expected to continue transitioning toward a slimmed-down monarchy. The idea is straightforward. Instead of a large extended royal network, the monarchy would focus primarily on the direct line of succession. That means public royal duties will increasingly center on the King, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, their children. Everyone else remains part of the royal family, but without the same institutional responsibilities. In many ways, this shift is already happening, and it reflects a broader effort to adapt the monarchy to modern expectations. Public accountability, clear roles, and a structure that avoids confusion about who speaks for the crown. Yet despite all the constitutional discussions, there is another side to this story that royal historians often emphasize. Because the monarchy is not just an institution. It is also a family whose members share deeply personal histories. Few stories illustrate that better than the enduring legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. Nearly 3 decades after her death, Diana's influence continues to shape the lives of her sons and the public perception of the monarchy. Even the handling of her estate after her passing revealed how royal procedures can intersect with private wishes, some of which were later modified through legal arrangements that sparked debate among observers. Pasted text. Those events remind us that royal decisions often carry emotional consequences far beyond legal documents. For Harry, the monarchy represents both his heritage and a complicated personal journey. For William, it represents the future responsibility of the crown. And for King Charles, it represents the institution he must protect for the next generation. Which is why moments like this, when ancient rules resurface, can feel so significant. Because they hint at the quiet work happening behind palace walls. Work designed to ensure that the monarchy remains stable long after current headlines fade. Still, one important fact remains clear. The palace has confirmed that the 1917 mandate exists and remains legally valid. But it has not announced any immediate action connected to it. That silence leaves room for speculation. Some believe it is simply a constitutional reminder. Others believe it may foreshadow future adjustments to how royal roles are defined. Only time will reveal the answer. But history suggests one thing with certainty. Whenever the monarchy revisits its oldest rules, it usually means the institution is quietly preparing for its next chapter. And as the House of Windsor continues to evolve under a new reign, those centuries-old documents may once again help shape the future of the crown. The British royal family has always been a blend of tradition, power, and deeply human stories. And sometimes, the most revealing moments are not the loud headlines, but the quiet confirmations hidden inside royal protocol. What do you think the palace's reference to the 1917 mandate really means? Is it simply history, or a signal that bigger changes are coming? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind the monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because here we reveal the royal history and palace secrets that the headlines often miss.